Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 164.
What I really find what's most beneficial for the learning is when someone makes a mistake inadvertently or intentionally, or tries to kind of step out of the box and says, well, what happens if I check this other box or if I tweak this other setting and something breaks? And so now they're trying to push the envelope, and it's that flare of curiosity that I think makes the best students. Is, well, what if I do this? What would happen if we do that? What does that look like?
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Well, Troy, welcome back to the show. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So what are you up to these days? You are obviously still in Canada?
Yeah, still in Canada. I call Calgary, Alberta, my home. So it's on the western side of Canada.
Beautiful. All right. So let's go back. The story of Troy, kind of where you came from, why Wi-Fi, bring you up to where you are today.
Okay, sure. So I've been working in the IT and the networking space for over 20 years now. So I've worked in a mix of end customers for the partners or the VARs or consultant kind of space, as well as with manufacturers and vendors. So seeing a mix of all those different environments and the challenges that come with each. I started off early in my career working on the service provider side. So I've worked with almost all the major SPs in Canada, the TELUS, Bell, Shaw, SaskTel. And I guess right now, currently employed with Aerohive Networks as a system engineer, which means I do all of your, kind of typical SE type related stuff. But I've also been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time doing training. So I teach a lot of our specific training courses across North America. So that's been very rewarding.
Yeah. What kind of led into the training?
I just hit the point where I wanted to inspire people and get them excited about Wi-Fi. A few years ago, I started to try to mentor someone and try to get them excited and jazzed up about Wi-Fi. But their heart was more on the data center side, which crushed my heart. But it's a bigger slice of the pie, so I fully understood why they wanted to move and embrace that technology. But I guess I see a lot of the quote unquote bad Wi-Fi deployed out there. So getting in front of students, telling them what can be done. Why it's better if you go down this path, whereas if you'll cause more pain for yourself if you go down this path, even though it's possible, it's going to lead to more headache and more pain for not only yourself and your users. And I guess also one of the things that I like about training is it gives me different perspective from the students. So we have one of the slides in our course that we have up there. It's the CWNA book. So it's authored by the two Davids, and obviously David Coleman works at Aerohive as well. So we talk about that book, and I refer to it as Wi-Fi 101. And then I ask the class, since we have upwards of 20 students in these classes, and I ask them, how many have heard of the CWNP program? And if I'm lucky, 3 hands go up. And this crushes me. I'm shocked. This is a Wi-Fi class. 3 people have heard of the program, and so it makes me more aware of kind of the bubble that I live in. Like we go to the WLPC conferences and we talk on Twitter to all the Wi-Fi folks. It seems like it's a very active, very engaging community, but we're a very small slice of the pie. There's lots going on there, and people just aren't aware of these programs and that these resources are available to them.
Which tells us too that there's a lot of opportunity still, and a lot of people who need good Wi-Fi training, and we need good Wi-Fi engineers.
Yeah, absolutely.
The SE side, what's kind of needed in that to really excel?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things going on with that. First and foremost, I think it's the realization or the appreciation that what makes you successful. And let's be honest, SEs fall in kind of the sales organization, so the primary responsibility is to sell and to make their product look good in front of the customers and address any technical concerns. Fundamentally, that's kind of what the SE role is. But to do that, you need to understand people and develop those relationships with people. Where those people you're talking to on the other side of the table, where they're coming from, what's shaping their perspective, and be able to put yourself in their shoes to understand, their concerns or, why they might not be in favor of technology, or be, trying to butt heads in favor of another approach.
Hmm.
And to be able to put yourself in those shoes and to understand where they're coming from, I think that's one of the key steps that sets you up to be a successful SE.
Good listening skills, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's fundamental. Just to sit there and to ask the questions and just let the person on the side of the table tell their story, give their explanation, and just listen to that full story.
Who would be really frustrated and unfulfilled in that type of role, you think?
I think one of the challenges that I've had to kind of overcome in that role is I've spent a lot of different times on a lot of different vendor technologies, and I
Okay.
find when you start working in the SE, specifically on the vendor side, you're pretty much in that that silo for that particular
Yeah,
vendor.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
can go very deep in that one product, but you lose somewhat to a certain extent access into the other technologies and the other developments that are going into the field. And I think every vendor is doing something really awesome that's out
Yeah.
there, and to be part of that world and just help Wi-Fi as a whole evolve, I think is pretty powerful. But to be able to tell yourself as an SE that, hey, if I become an SE with this vendor, I can go deep with that one vendor,
Yeah.
but I won't necessarily have the same access across the board to everybody else. And also the ignition or recognition that you don't get to spend as much time on the technology as you'd like or you previously
Okay.
might have been used to. So you don't get the sort of the CLI feel, if you
Yeah.
will.
So if you've been out in the field a lot, you're kind of enjoying that, and then you get a promotion or you move to this other role, things are going to change.
Yes, yeah, and often change is good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool things that happen. I get to exposed to a wide variety of projects where if you just look at a customer, for example, they have their one network and that's what they may see for 15, 20, 30
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
the one network. They know it like the back of their hand, but that's just the one perspective they have. Whereas on the SC side, kind of the VAR partner side, you see a mix of different networks, which is exciting to see how you can deploy Wi-Fi differently.
If you're going down the SE route to really believe in the product that you are promoting and the
Yes, yeah,
technology.
that's a fundamental bit. Yeah.
Okay, other side, teaching, instructing. What makes that so great? You said inspiring people. What you would recommend for people who are interested in going down that? How do you even get into that?
So I've come from the kind of teaching training path from a long history
Okay.
of kind of I'm a bit of a cert junkie to be honest.
Okay.
So I even as a young kid, like I went through all the swimming lessons, life saving. I became a lifeguard, saving first responders, all that kind of stuff. And to do that, you take a class, you practice your skills, you go through an exam. I became certifier of those different training programs.
Yeah.
I started early in my career working in the training departments at Nortel Networks. So I was kind of a lab rat in that environment. But as again, training, we bring students into the classroom, you learn the material, you practice it, and then there's the whole exam certification path. And so to me, what I found really rewarding is that structure of, you learn some concepts, then you test the material to make sure you know it, and you're always setting goals or milestones for yourself. And so I find that just personally, that's kind of a path or setting those goalposts that I like to follow. Um, but I guess the training is I've kind of hit to the point where I feel like I've amassed a fair bit of information. I've been burned many times. I've have some war stories that I can share, and so just
Yeah,
sharing
that's
those
good to know.
experiences of this is what I did, and then that's why it's a bad idea. So
Uh-huh.
you guys can go down the same path, but here's a better path. I think you'll find to be able to relay those stories, hear from students, their concerns, what they're experiencing in their networks, the challenge that they have kind of with the layer 8 within their organization, how they're dealing with that, and then just have instead of just kind of preaching at them, have a dialogue during the class, and so it's very interactive, and it's a mutual exchange of ideas and information, and on Twitter, we have a lot of discussions where they're kind of quick comments where,
Yeah.
quickly ends up to an it depends.
Yeah.
Where if you start probing deeper and you have the opportunity or the kind of the platform to exchange those ideas, you can get deeper and move towards a
You
solution
can
that
actually look at some of those dependencies.
exactly, yes.
Very cool. So who's been some of your influential teachers that have made an impact on you?
So I guess the people that have made a lot of impact are the ones that are regularly posting content
Okay.
and then providing commentary, and back in just having the back and forth dialogue.
Yeah.
And so I spent a bunch of time in university, but mostly it was an excuse, I think, to take philosophy classes. So I enjoy thought exercises and kind of the what if we did this and what if we did that. Okay, let's go down this path, and maybe it's not the best path ever, but let's think through this and what would happen. Maybe there are some benefits. So I enjoy the discourse and the dialogue and the conversations, that kind of thing. So there's many people out there, but I guess early on in my career, I had some people that really challenged me to learn more and get more deeper and deeper into technology, and just that mindset that I took away, that the like a passion to learn, to keep going forward. Um, so there's a few people that I've had in my career that have inspired that, and then I've also been fortunate enough to work with two project managers.
Okay.
And so I come from the technical side, I'm more of a technical purist. I like to make fun of project managers, but I've had two that have been extremely exceptional. And if I have future regrets in my career, it'll be not working on another project with these two project managers. Just their ability to step back and see the bigger picture, to have an appreciation for the technology restraints, as well as to manage people and set expectations, and then take input from everybody, and then draw the line in the sand that okay, great, I've heard from everybody. A decision needs to be made. This is the decision, and this is the way we're going forward. And it's just been exceptional to work with those two individuals.
So it sounds like they took time, listened, took feedback, went back and forth with everyone involved. What made them really excel as project managers in your life?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It was understanding the full picture, understanding the whys, and knowing when decisions need to be made
Yeah.
and when you needed to listen to everybody.
Let's go back to younger Troy. Go give yourself some advice early on in your career or as you're starting out. What advice would you give?
I guess two things come to mind. I guess I'd encourage myself to learn more,
Okay.
and to keep finding new sources of information. And so, what would have gone through my career, I spent a lot of time reading technical books, technical manuals, a lot more time doing that. And now I regret not reading more like autobiographies or
Mm,
histories of people and countries, and more events in the world, gaining that bigger perspective. And then also say have more of a courage to take leaps or make changes in your
oh, that's
career.
good.
If you find yourself you're in a stagnant position, or you're not challenging yourself, have the courage to move on and find something else. There's no point showing up for work every day in a career where you're not finding satisfying and fulfilling.
Yeah. What's something you think you did right at an early age? Something you're proud of?
um, I think it was spending the time going home, and so at the time I wouldn't have called it a lab, but I guess effectively now
Yeah.
that's what it's called. But I'd go home and I'd play with technology, and getting that exposure and experience, trying different things, outside the work environment, just exploring and playing, is what kind of ignited the passion, and also gave me information that came up down the road when questions would come up in meetings or discussion with customers, peers, clients,
Yeah.
where I've tried something, that you can provide that commentary, and that hey, I've done that before, I've seen what happens. I think that's helped.
You got to invest in yourself. What would that mean?
So I think there's multiple facets to that. Obviously, to be successful in your career as a wireless professional, you need to understand that the Wi-Fi is the protocol and the technology itself. And so having some form of an access point, regardless of what vendor that is, but being able to test and look at packet exchanges, and some of the basic tools that you need to troubleshoot a wireless network, and just playing with that on your own, going through those exercises. That I think is a huge piece of it. But also understanding people and personalities,
Mm,
and how to persuade people, how to engage them, how to understand the perspective, and then if you need to kind of move their thought patterns,
mm.
move their ideas, kind of tear down that wall that's in between the two of you, so that you can come together and have a more of a fruitful discussion.
You teach, obviously, you said a lot and doing it more and more. What do you think makes a good student? Someone who do you really see when they come to your classes and okay, that guy, that gal, they're getting it. What are some of those things that we can do to be better students?
So find for better or worse, our training, I describe it as very much kind of a spoon fed
Okay.
training. And the intention is that, when you walk away or you go back and you can't remember how to do something, anyway, our slideware and our courseware is, check this box, type in this field. As we walk you step by step through the material. And if you do everything right, if you follow all the slides, everything works at the end.
Yeah.
And so it's a completion of the lab. You're like, okay, let's test it. And everyone's, hey, it all works. And that's, you get the warm fuzzy that, I built it right. I can follow the steps. But what I really find what's most beneficial for the learning is when someone makes a mistake inadvertently or intentionally, or tries to kind of step out of the box and
Yeah.
says, well, what happens if I check this other box, or if I tweak this other setting and something breaks? And so now they're trying to push the envelope, and it's that flare of curiosity that I think makes the best students. Is, well, what if I do this? What would happen if we do that? What does that look like? What are the implications of that? And then playing with that. And so if I find students that are trying to play
Yeah.
with the software, the hardware in the class, and get excited about that, to me, that's, those students that I think got a lot out of the class. And I think I've given them some of the fundamental steps to help allow them to be successful with that technology concept, or that, hardware as after they leave the class.
Just really that curiosity pays off in the long run, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And if they're curious about everything in their life,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, yeah,
fantastic for them.
even
They're,
better,
they're
yeah.
awesome.
Richer life that way. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
so in the industry, is there an common mistake you see that you wish you could, wave the magic antenna and just make change?
Yeah, there is, and it kind of to put this in kind of a story-based context. Is I took this mandatory HR class. It was
Okay.
a 2-day class years and years ago, and it was an interesting class, and it was about understanding different people and the personalities, and they took several different models of personality types, like colors and seasons, and the 4-letter codes if you're a judge or a perceiver, and introvert, experts. They took all the highlights and they jumbled it all together in this class. And it was interesting on the second day of the class. And so the instructor who taught the class, like, she played soccer and basketball
Okay.
in varsity sports, and so she was quite the athlete. But she set up this scenario that says, hey, in several weeks I'm going to a wedding, and I need to lose 10 pounds. I need people in the class to give me ideas on how I can do this. And so the class immediately started giving her suggestions on, training programs
Ah,
and workout regimens and diets that she could follow. And it just got more and more ridiculous. And I mentioned, like, she was definitely an athlete, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
looking at her, like, there wasn't 10 pounds to lose. And so as it got more and more ridiculous, the suggestions being thrown out, I stepped back, and so I asked the question, why? Why are you trying to lose 10
Yeah.
pounds? And this was actually the whole point of the exercise. It was to take us down like a 3-hour path of presenting scenarios to solutions. But we didn't step back and ask the question, why was she trying to do this? And then once we understand her motivations, then it opened up a
Yeah,
whole new
yeah.
set of suggestions. But I think as an industry as a whole, to answer your question, is that we're very eager to jump in and solve someone's solutions, especially like engineering, technical people, that we don't step back and ask the whys and look at the bigger picture. So I think if there's one mistake that I see across the board, is it's not asking why. Stop and ask why.
Uh, something in your past, because of course you're not doing any mistakes these days, but
See what's
yeah,
possible. Yeah.
any employers listening, uh,
Yeah.
big mistake or misstep you made that taught you something positive.
So I guess I was working at one project down in the U.S., and the sales guy, he was so it was more of a professional services
Okay.
kind of side of things, and we the sales guy in there, and he was very excited, super eager for the project to be successful, and wanted to be involved and wanted to get his hands dirty on the project. And so we set up a mesh network that was set up, and we had our root access point that sort of everything tied back to the root. And it was, just above the control room, so not very high, relatively easy to get to compared to the other access points. And he wanted to be the guy to attach the antennas to the access point. And things were going pretty well that day. Things were pretty smooth. I was like, all right, you can go up the ladder and
Yeah.
mount the access point. So he goes up there, and it very quickly, screws the antennas on, comes back down, and we're set to go. And this was the last access point of the whole mesh that we were building. This is the cornerstone to bring it all together. And we turned everything on, powered everything up, and the mesh would not converge.
Ooh.
And so we're scratching our heads, and we're entering commands to try to figure out what's going on. And everything was pointing towards a problem with the signal strength coming in at the root access point. But I was reluctant to, go up there and inspect what the sales guys had done. And finally, after, 30, 45 minutes, like, we got to go up and look at the access point. And what had happened is, and it was most likely my fault. I hadn't given enough clear direction, but he'd attached the 2.4 antennas on the 5 gig ports and the 5 gig on the port. So he just swapped the antennas connectors. So we quickly swapped those over, and boom, the mesh came right up as expected. So I guess it was lessons I learned is, it's great to see his excitement, getting him involved, but taking the time just to help explain what needed to happen and how to test when he did that little step of attaching the antennas, make sure the antenna labeled 5 gigahertz is on the port label.
Is there any project that you're most proud of or something big that you've been involved in that you just really said, "I'm glad I I was part of that"?
Yeah, so it was a relatively recent project. I was involved with the Calgary Board of Education,
Okay.
which is it's the second largest school board in Canada. So it was a massive project. They have about 250 different schools that they were refreshing the Wi-Fi on the project. And this is actually with one of the project managers that I
Okay.
mentioned earlier, Glenda Schufelt. I was fortunate enough to work with her. And just the scope of the project, we ended up touching everything.
Oh, wow.
So there was, the Windows environment, their virtual environment. We worked with Glenda, and we developed, jointly with Aerohive and the CB, an application for an onboarding mechanism to have devices quickly connect via a customized Capta portal with as few clicks as possible to make it very streamlined for both parents who show up at the schools or sponsor employees, students and staff to register their own devices. But just the multiple and multitude teams that we had to interface with, from the installation teams to the site survey teams, security teams, getting them all on board with setting the firewall rules, having all those different conversations. So it wasn't just a Wi-Fi only project. It was dealing with multiple different personality types, different backgrounds of people, different layers within the organization, and kind of being in the middle of that. I found that extremely rewarding. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it was a successful project. They were very happy with it. Good feedback, but it was just very rewarding at the end to know all that hard work paid off.
Very cool. Is there a favorite piece of equipment you're using these days? Something that's just in the tool belt all the time?
Yeah, so I think it already gets a lot of it of excitement, and it should. A lot of folks use the Wi-Fi Explorer tool
Okay.
on Mac OS that Adrian developed. I think that's a fantastic tool. But I also find myself spending a lot of time plugging into console ports, just kind of initially like proof of concept, setting up access points. So the Air console or Get console, the Bluetooth Wi-Fi enabled console that has a battery pack, where you can just plug it into the AP and then go sit on the other side of the room or outside of the wall or away from a noisy fan. But having that wireless connection, that little tool I find extremely valuable.
Very cool. We've got a WLPC coming up. What's highlight of what you're going to be talking about, or at least one of the things that you're going to be talking about that you're excited to share?
Oh, yeah. So as a little bit of a teaser, there's a lot of discussion about the benefits of 128 versus 192 versus 256-bit encryption. And so I've had recently, oddly enough, some questions about which bit mechanism is used, is it 128 or 256? Kind of how does that play in? So one of my topics is kind of diving into the protocol and see where 128 where 128 and 256 is used. And then also to help kind of put that in context, I'll kind of talk about rotational
Okay.
algorithms, ROT 13 and ROT 26, some of the Caesar based algorithms.
Very cool. Troy, thank you so much for spending time. I feel like I should call you Professor Troy now. And
No, no, no. Professor of lost
yeah,
items.
yeah. Yeah, the misfit toys. If people want to connect with you, how would they do that?
On Twitter at TroyMart.
Okay.
So just like Walmart, but many times better. Or on LinkedIn, you can find me at Troy Martin.
Beautiful. All right, Troy, you have a great rest of your week, and we will talk soon.
All right, sounds good. Take care, Matthew.
10 Talks.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Long, and I'm going to take this opportunity for this 10 Talk to talk about a journey in optimizing my SSH experience. Does everyone know what SSH is? No? Come on. So SSH is a remote, what's that? Telnet? See, it's secure Telnet, that's what it is. So with these 10 talks, there's a lot of content in this one. So before I start, I want to let you know all the resources that I use for this presentation is on the slide. So if you're interested in following up and checking some of the concepts out that I go through, here's the resources. And of course, you can always reach out to me directly, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. So the objective I had was I was learning about doing some security studies and learning about different ciphers and key exchanges and all that fun stuff. So I wanted to increase the security of SSH connections, but I also wanted to optimize the user experience. So sometimes that's kind of they don't mesh, right? So sometimes you want to increase security. Usually it's harder for users to work with. But actually this worked out pretty cool. So the key components of SSH connections is you have symmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption is when it takes there's part input from the client, part input from the server. They create a symmetric key. That key is used to then encrypt the data that's passed back and forth between the server and the client. Asymmetric encryption is used for authentication. So some people get those mixed up, but the asymmetric encryption is actually used for the authentication part of this. And then you have hash-based message authentication codes. And what those are used for is to maintain integrity of all the messages that are passing back and forth between the client and the server. With the SSHD config file, which is the main configuration file for your SSH servers, there's some really quick things that you can do to increase the overall security of your SSH server. You can do things like configure alternate ports, disable root login, disable password-based logins. Of course, if you disable your password-based your password login, ensure that your public key works. Otherwise, you're going to lock yourself out. Hopefully, you would have physical access to that box. You can also configure and prioritize the ciphers that are used, message authentication codes, as well as the key exchange algorithms that are used. When it comes to SSH keys, one of the resources I point to on that resource slide is the InfoSec Mozilla dev page for best practices for SSH. They recommend that if backwards compatibility is a requirement, to use RSA keys that are 4096 in size. If backwards compatibility is not a requirement, use the newer ED25519 keys. The cool thing about that is those new keys, they're 256 bits, so they're much smaller, and you get the equivalent protection of an RSA 3072-bit key. With your private keys, you always want to ensure you have key protection by using a strong passphrase. So there comes one more thing, right? So if I'm going to use a key, I got to use a passphrase. So how can we optimize the use of a passphrase so I don't have to enter it every time I make a remote connection? We're going to use what's called an SSH agent. If you're using Mac or Linux, that's built in. You can simply use the SSH add command to add your private key to the SSH agent. In OS X, you also have the opportunity to add your private key to the keychain. In Windows, you would use the Paget utility. Another really cool thing that I came across, I was reading the book SSH Mastery by Michael W. Lucas and watched one of his videos from a user group presentation he did. And he mentioned this plugin, which is called PAM SSH Agent Auth. And what this allows you to do is actually forward your SSH agent session using your public key, thus negating the need to enter a password anytime you needed to use sudo. So what's cool about that is I have a remote session, I'm using public key authentication, I get rid of my password, I then log into the remote box, and I need to run a sudo command, and I don't need to enter my password. To do that, obviously, you need to get this module onto your SSH server, your Linux or Mac. You need to make a one-line edit in the etc pamd sudo file and a one-line edit in the etc sudoers file. And of course, when we edit that file, we're always using best practices of sudo vi sudo. Never try to open that file directly. Lastly, there's a lot of things to remember there. You can compile all of this stuff into an SSH config file. So you don't have to remember what the username is to log in, where I'm pointing to my private key, the port, and if I'm going to forward my agent, you can just create a simple file and SSH to that. So, enough slides, because slides are boring. Let's actually do this. All right. We see that? All right, so this is the SSHD config file. This is the main configuration file for your SSH server. You can see up top, we've got the port directive. You guys can see that, right? Looks like it's cut off. Okay. We've got the port directive here. I'm going to use an alternate port of 2222 for this demonstration. The permit root login directive, I'm going to set that to no, which means that a root user cannot directly log in over SSH. I'm going to set the password authentication directive to no as well. That way you can't use a username and password to log in. But again, remember, test your keys first. And then next, again, from the InfoSec Mozilla best practices for SSH, they make recommendations for key exchange algorithms, ciphers, and MACs, message authentication codes, depending on the version of SSH that you're running. I have really streamlined this one. There's only a couple here that I've configured, but you can go to the site, you can see what version you're running, copy and paste them in, and you can increase the security very quickly on your server. Next, we are going to look at the etc pamd.sudo file. You have to enter one line of configuration. And this is basically telling this application that you can point to the PAM SSH agent auth module and then point that to your authorized keys file. So now it's going to use your key to do your authentication and you don't need a password. One last little thing left you've got to do in your etc sudo file. We're going to forward the SSH authorization socket to the server. So that enables the key to go through, the socket to be used, and then now you can go ahead and use the public key as opposed to the password. All right, so let's get the log going, and let's go ahead and log in. So to do all of this, we're going to use an alternate port. -A. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm SSH in. I'm going to use the alternate port of 2222, my username, the host, and I'm going to use the -A flag, which is going to forward the SSH agent. So this SSH add -L flag tells you that your key is loaded, and you can load multiple keys in there. So this time, it's not blog. There we go. All right, so I've successfully SSH'd in. I can see who am I. I can check to see if the socket is enabled. We can see right here the SSH auth sock. SSH auth sock is there. And if I needed to change to root, it does not ask me for a password because I've forwarded and used my public key for authentication. So it saves a lot of typing. All right, so I'm going to escape out of that, and we can make this a little bit easier with the config file, and I'll show you that real quick. So here I made a host, UB1. I put all of the directives in there that I used for that connection. So now, all I have to do is type SSH UB1 and done. And I'm right on 0. All right. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.